Okay, welcome back to another episode of Pokemon Heart and Soul, episode 7, Sudowoodo. What the? Mason stared at the tree for a moment, looking around. This wasn't here last time, was it? He wonders. Mason had recently taken a boat from Sinnoh City. However, unfortunately, he was unable to get a direct route to Olivine City, so instead he went to Goldenrod City and now was making the long walk back, and he was nearly there. But now a tree was in his way, which was extremely weird. Yes, this path was not well maintained, but a full tree. And how did he miss it last time? This was seriously starting to confuse him. Mason tried walking around, but the forest was too dense. And once again, he was bothered by this tree. He did not know why. It was just weird. It even looked different from the others. Mason once again tries to find a way around it. On one side, the forest is super dense, but on the other, it's a bit of a steep uphill climb for a few feet. But the trees up there look less dense. Maybe he could get through that way. Mason nods to himself before starting the climb. But as he does that, an empty Pokeball falls from his belt and ding! What the? Mason has now caught a Pokemon and the tree problem is gone. So that tree was a Sudowoodo, he mutters to himself. Well, I guess I now have 6 Pokemon. And so he continued, and then he at last reached Olivine City and immediately made his way to the lighthouse. He had the medicine needed for the sick Ampharos. Once he gave the Ampharos the medicine, it immediately stood up before falling, in which Jasmine warned the electric type that it should not rush itself too much, but she smiled, thrilled to see that it was doing much better. And then she turns to Mason. Guess that means I owe you a gym battle, doesn't it? Mason nods excitedly, and so they head to the gym, in which she sends out her first Pokemon, a Magnemite. And Mason sends out Sudowoodo. This will be his first time using it. But as a rock type, it's strong against still. A single sonic boom takes it out. It seems that unfortunately Mason's newest member is not very powerful. So Mason returns Sudowoodo before sending out Politoed. This seems like a bad decision. However, taking advantage of Politoed's speed and jumping abilities, Mason is able to prevent Magnemite from hitting it, and with a dynamic punch, he puts the first Pokemon of Jasmine's team down. So Jasmine sends out her second, a Magneton. Mason smiles. Alright, Politoed, now I need you to use Perish Song. Politoed smiles, nodding. He knows this strategy well. And so, with that, Politoed begins singing while dodging a thunderbolt after thunderbolt. Of course, it's only 3 thunderbolts before the frog finally decides it's satisfied with its dancing And the frog did take extra time, so now there's one turn left. Quickly, Mason returns Politoed and sends out Pichu, who takes a Thunderbolt no problem before excitedly slamming a Dizzy Punch into the Magmaton. Now, it is unknown if Pichu realized that Magneton went down in one hit because of Pierce Song, or if Pichu thinks it was Dizzy Punch. Whatever the case, Pichu is extremely excited by this win, and so when Mason calls it back, it's with the little mouse type dancing over to him. And then out comes Politoed, and out to face it, a gigantic Steelix. And immediately Steelix uses Dig, which Mason smiles at, having predicted that and being glad that he did not call a Pierce Song, as from underground the giant Pokemon would not have been able to hear the song, thus rendering it useless. But now the problem is Steelix is underground, so now what? Mason thinks for a moment before calling for a Dynamic Punch. Politoed doesn't waste a second, slamming its fist into the ground. Rocks give away ever so slightly, and it's now standing on a small crater. And then, with perfect timing, Mason is able to call Politoed to jump. Nodding, Politoed jumps from the ground right as Steelix emerges, and a well-placed water gun clearly angers the giant snake, which is able to retaliate with a crunch, thus making it impossible to dodge the Perish Song. And so, with that, Mason smiles, knowing that the battle only has 3 turns left. Steelix immediately uses Iron Tail, while Mason calls for, once again, Dynamic Punch. Unfortunately for Politoed, it misses this punch, taking the tail attack to its stomach. And while in the air, it receives an Iron Head. However, Politoed slowly gets up, grunting ever so slightly. And then, once again, Mason tries to counter, this time a crunch with Dynamic Punch. And once again, Politoed misses. Now, this is because Dynamic Punch only has a 50% chance of hitting, which is really stupid, but whatever. And so with this, Politoed faints. However, just a moment later, the giant steel snake falls too, thanks to Perish Song. Mason slightly frowns, as this was not how he wanted to win, but he does still have one Pokemon, and if he had used Flaffy or Teddiursa, he would probably still have 2, so it's still a win. Might not be the cleanest win, but it's still a win. And so he gracefully accepts the next badge. Mason smiles. 2 more to go. And so Mason quickly makes his way to the next town. But he reaches the gym to find it closed. And then Mason isn't quite sure what he's feeling, but maybe there's a slight tremor in the ground, maybe a slight ring in his ear. Whatever the case, he barely notices it until he notices that Flaffy is absolutely freaking out, laying down and covering its ears. Flaffy, are you okay? Mason asks, running over to his friend worriedly. And that's where we'll end it. So, I'll see you guys next time.